Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you have your natal sun either squaring or opposing Saturn. I have the square, and these are hard angles, which means that the contact that the sun makes to Saturn is going to be challenging, and it's going to be frustrated, so that what it represents seems like it's hard to actually manifest. Okay, so let's just review what each of these planets represent so we can know how this plays out, because the sun is our aspirational self. It's who we came here to be, the light we came here to shine. And so it can reflect our ambition, our goals, and that sort of thing. And I would say it is our core personality traits. You know, we have inner planets also, besides the sun, like the moon and Mercury, Venus, Mars. We have the rising sign, which is a point that is, very personal for us. And they represent the core personality traits as well. But the sun is first and foremost. So it can also be like your creativity, and that can be a broad term because it can mean anything that you express that is your personal self-expression. You're not copying other people. So in other words, like even the way that you dress is a form of personal self-expression, but how many people are just kind of copycats, and I was recently, I've been noticing this recently when I've just been observing people. I noticed some teenagers, and they all had the same brand of shoes. And I saw some young women who were older than that. And I remember I think they were going to Lollapalooza. And I was on the same train, and they all had heart-shaped sunglasses. I guess that must be the latest thing. I'm totally unplugged from that. And I'm not saying like when I was a teenager, I didn't, follow trends. But I mean, it's more glaringly obvious to me being outside of that now than it would have been then. So that's not really what I'm talking about. That's like following a trend. I'm talking more about being a trendsetter, or maybe you're not trying to do anything, you just are trying to express yourself, but it's different, than other people. You're setting yourself apart. So that can be one form of it, but other creative self-expression, and it gets blocked. When there's a square, that can indicate a blockage from Saturn, which can be an authority figure. But this is very interesting because I want to give a shout out to cafeastrology.com, where I consulted before I pressed the record button, and they seem to suggest this is coming from within ourselves. Anybody who has a square, they lump the square and the opposition together, but of course there's going to be, certain things that may separate it, but it's basically going to be the same, where there's a very difficult attempt or ability for the person to express this. Now, I do believe that this can come because of an authority figure. I just did the conjunction between the sun and Saturn, and they mentioned that. But with these, talking about self-consciousness here, I really feel that that can be because someone was maybe too serious, like a parent kind of frowned upon what they consider to be their child's, hobbies, or especially with things like creative pursuits, because that's something that sometimes a child loves to do so much that they will do throughout their childhood and adolescence. And the parent is afraid that, the child is going to continue to do that versus doing something that's practical. See, Saturn is about groundedness. It's about being realistic, being practical. The what we would call traditional values. Artists are bohemian. They're kind of like, nonconformists. So they're not traditional, to say the least. For instance, Jim Morrison, they mention famous people who have hard aspects from the sun to Saturn, and Jim Morrison had the opposition. And I was going to say about the opposition is that that in particular can be like a reaction to another person who's trying to exert that authority over the individual. So I'm kind of surprised that they're not mentioning it specifically. I'm sure if I went somewhere else, they might. They're kind of saying it's like an internalized thing. And I don't think that these kinds of things are. I think that there's always some sort of situation that is creating that self-consciousness, maybe second guessing oneself, or feeling inadequate, perhaps. Just for the heck of it, I looked at another site, and right away I saw something that suggested, this idea of being maybe self-critical due to a parent who was too exacting on you when you were growing up. And they mentioned the father because Saturn represents the father. This particular site is called Astrology King. Now, I just did that to kind of, validate my own feelings. And it's really funny because I don't do this with all the readings that I do, the astrology readings. But for some reason, I feel like I want to give out information that I also see reflected on other sites. So that's why I was doing it. And I'm glad that it kind of went along with what I just said, because I do feel that these things start with authority figures, that they don't just come out of the person. Of course, you could say Saturn is the lord of karma. So I suppose there's always the possibility that the soul comes into this lifetime with that tendency to be very hard on themselves. But, typically, I think we can see it in childhood. It was also mentioned that this individual can have a sense of humor that is rather sarcastic. And that was also true for the conjunction, but I forgot to mention that. And I would slightly disagree. I wouldn't call it sarcasm. I would call it deadpan humor. Like, there are some comics who are really funny, but they don't have a lot of emotion. And they just kind of say things very drolly. And I think that is, because that's kind of like how Capricorns can be hilarious. Because they're so realistic that they say everything in a very straightforward way. But sometimes it's so somber that it's funny because it's, kind of like dark humor, if you will. But anyway, I think that that's an interesting characteristic too. And I suspect that in some cases, these people may suffer from social anxiety because of that self consciousness that they possess. That's honestly what I feel that social anxiety really is excessive self consciousness, meaning that you feel, and I'm talking about the people who believe that they have this, that everybody is just constantly scrutinizing you and waiting for you to make a mistake. And if you have prominent Virgo, for instance, I have the moon in Virgo, but even the sun in Virgo or Virgo ascendant, I feel that this can exacerbate those tendencies. So, but also even Cancer, that's a sign that I feel tends to be hypersensitive to any embarrassment, ridicule, or the like. And so, even if somebody isn't outwardly ridiculing you, you may feel like inside, I know that they're just yucking it up over whatever. And it's really interesting because I think back to the time when I was the most self conscious. And I would say it was when, and I think this is true for all children, was when I was probably about 12, maybe on the verge of adolescence. And I remember, like, if I was at the grocery store on the weekend and with my parents and somebody happened to from my class come by, I was mortified because it was like, for some reason, it was so uncool to be with your parents. That's just like a developmental stage. But when you continue to feel this way, there is something going on that is excessive. It's not, because I do feel that we do have that stage where we might be a little bit exaggerating, our importance in other people's like lives in terms of them watching everything that we do. That to me is just like kind of a developmental stage. But then we grow out of that, hopefully. So the interesting thing about this situation is because Saturn is about ambition, it rules the 10th house. It wants to have that status, not so much, I'm not talking about, being on the A list necessarily, but being somebody who is accomplished. That's what you may want for yourself, and yet you may fear achievement at the same time. And it's a very fascinating situation that to even unravel it of why there may be different reasons for it. And some of them may be karmic. It may be something from past life where you were the center of attention. You were somebody who was very important in the community, and maybe it didn't end well. And that's something that makes you fear being in the spotlight again. But there's other reasons too. And I think it can feel very painful to be someone with the square or the opposition from the sun to Saturn and really be ambitious, but not have the success to show for it. It's a different story when, you're not really plugged into that, you don't really care that much. So that's an important distinction to make, is that just because you have this square or opposition and you share it with somebody else, it doesn't mean that both of you are going to experience it the same way. And so, it was really interesting going back to Jim Morrison. His father was, I think, an admiral of the Navy. He was a commander. He was a big wig. And so that authoritarian type of behavior that is commonplace for people in the military, you can just imagine how that would have gone over with Jim, who was a sun in Sagittarius. He had the moon in Taurus, which is very stubborn. So it doesn't like being dictated to, because it wants to do things, in its own time. And he had Aquarius rising, very rebellious and erratic. Sag is rebellious too, but Aquarius, is electric but erratic. And that's what made Jim Morrison a legend, because he would do like things that people didn't expect him to do. And he had a very electric aura. But he, I think he probably, who knows, maybe he drank to get rid of his inhibitions, or used whatever other substances. Maybe it would be very difficult for him if he was sober to, do a performance. I don't know. But anyway, it's important to look at your tendency to be hopeful and positive in your life, because these hard angles with Saturn can be difficult. Saturn can be a sombering effect. And, to have a hard angle from a planet to Saturn just adds to that. So being able to counter it, whether it's with affirmations, meditation, to kind of keep a constant, state of consciousness where you're not going from, a negative one to trying to be more positive, but kind of like an uneven keel. Nervous system management may help as well. And, I believe that all of these angles that are challenging can be resolved. In this lifetime, they may be part of your goals, what you need to do to fulfill your mission. Maybe that's a good way of putting it. So anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this and resonated with it, obviously. If you would like a private reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.